Look, people, it's been an accelerant in American politics for a long time now. You know what we're talking about here: anger. It's what Barry Goldwater tapped into when he courted resentful white voters in the 1964 election. It's what Pat Buchanan was aiming at when he declared a culture war in the early 90s. And of course, Tea Party antics throughout the Obama administration eventually fused into the Freedom Caucus, and later, the seemingly bottomless well of Trump-fueled rage. We've entered a period in America when indignation and infamy are, apparently, the only viable doorway to politics. Anything else just seems unremarkable and insufficient to the moment. And yet, all the while, we hear demands to find common ground. It's still frequently suggested that there's more that unites America than divides it. Above all, there's been a non-stop questioning around the source of this anger. Where does it come from? Why now? Can it be addressed? And who is addressing it better? So to think about this, we want to ask a simple question. Is it okay to be angry? And if it is, how is it okay? And what should it mean for politics in the US? There's a prevailing sentiment that anger and outrage are kind of exclusively the domain of Republicans, and that Democrats just fare better when they stay above the fray. But the current environment is almost certainly challenging that orthodoxy, because a wider cross-current of people are experiencing misgiving and anger at the flurry of events instigated by the present administration. It also seems to be awakening a new fight mentality among Democrats. The lingering question is whether Democrats can utilize and manage this anger effectively, and whether this will have a lasting impact on the future of the party and American politics going forward. So join me, Roddy Lepke, and my partner in crime, Julian Amarante, for the inaugural episode of Angry and Verklempt, Politics from a Safe Distance. Okay, we are live, my friend. All right, names first. I'm Roddy Lepke.
I'm Julian Amirante.
All right, and welcome to Angry and Verklempt. Okay, so first things first, we gotta say why we're doing this.
Yeah, because it kind of melds really well with our first subject. Okay, I mean, for me personally, for you it might be a little bit different because you've got a cooler head than I do. Okay, so yeah, because I got tired of shit posting on Facebook. Okay. And, badgering right-wing lunatics on what was Twitter until I got suspended before it became X. And
before you got put in Twitter jail.
Yeah. Well, I was put in Twitter jail so many times that I just couldn't be rehabilitated anymore. All right. Yeah. So now I'm, I'm actually a well-behaved guy on Blue Sky. Although I shitpost every morning on Facebook, and simply because my anger has to go sideways. Otherwise, the poor guy in the street is going to just...
Yeah, I'm here to tell our listeners that I can verify this, that you are the expert at like massive diatribes on Facebook.
Thank you. I actually take that as a compliment. I really appreciate that.
It's fantastic. In fact, now Facebook is filled up with all this advertising and crap and AI, but the one thing that I can always count on is that your posts break through. For whatever reason, they're always at the top of my feed.
I think it's because I'm kind of like anti-Facebook. You know what I mean? There's a kind of an ironic stance because I'm on Facebook doing really what's not Facebook kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I'm kind of like saying, yeah, you're all bastards for being on here, but I'm also on there myself. So, they're kind of hypocritical. But I'm glad we're doing this because we need to do this. You know what I mean? I think it's important that we do.
I think so too. For me, it's that, right? I mean, for everyone listening, we're both Canadians. So we don't get a lot of chances actually to sound off about American politics.
And
so the one chance.
Yeah. And we're Canadians from the periphery.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is important.
That's right. Yeah. Julian's from Sudbury. I'm from Calgary, the great conservative backwater.
You're turning your back on Winnipeg so fast?
Well, I was born in Winnipeg, but I was raised a Calgarian.
Okay,
so,
okay.
I'm a Cowtown boy. In any event, this is, our conversations are really the only chance that I get to sound off about American politics continuously. And, I think that everyone needs to benefit from those
Roddy,
conversations.
why don't we tell people where this really originated? Sitting around
Cottage country.
Yeah, it's
cottage country.
The cottage, never getting to do what we needed to do because we were sitting there just yelling at the world.
Yeah.
From 7
A
o'clock.
little of this helps. This always helps, but
yeah, Roddy and I would we would sit around a cottage there and have coffee early in the morning and just come out of the gate screaming and then realize it was 11 a.m. and we'd been doing this for 4 hours and we had to get on with the day.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And then I think one time I said, if somebody taped this would be a good podcast. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And just to assuage everyone's fears, we're not going to do 4 hours here.
Not yet.
Not yet. Unless we're in that kind of demand. But if that comes about, we'll do it. Okay, so next order of business. What are we going to be doing? I think, it's fair to say for the next while, we're going to be just talking to each other. Because we were just talking about this off camera, Julian. We're not schmucks, but we're not well known. Okay, so how we're going to be doing it, we were both listening to David Frum on the Bulwark today.
Oh, he was.
And he was actually very good. He was very good, actually.
Man, in a way, it kind of bothers me, okay? Because
that these right-wing intellectuals are the ones that are actually sensible.
He's managed to rehabilitate himself.
Well, very much. Yeah, since the Bush years.
This is the guy. I mean, you can draw a direct line to the fact that we're dealing with MAGA today because guys like him courted the Tea Party. And I mean, we're not making this up. Go look it up yourself. I mean, it's a matter of public record.
Oh, we're going to talk about that in our next episode.
And at the same time, he's the son of a bitch who came up with the axis of evil line.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
okay?
I'm well aware of it, yeah.
And sold that war, which created a lot of the malaise, which we're going to talk about today. Sold this fake war, which resulted in it's apocryphal the amount of people that have died since the second invasion of Iraq. So I mean, but you're right. Now he's talking sense, and how does that happen?
You know what? I think that the American scene is just so scrambled now that these kinds of figures who these are smart people. They're just not necessarily politically aligned with the two of us, but these are smart people who, in the context of the crazy that exists in the administration, they not only, understand how that politics works inside the Republican Party, but, they pass off a level of sensibility that, maybe we wouldn't be drawn to in another context, but in this context, we certainly are.
I mean, in keeping with this...
It's a realism, right? It's a realism.
Yeah, I agree. Like in keeping with this discussion that we're having about, why we're doing this, you and I are doing this podcast. I mean, one of the things that really strikes me, particularly about the example with Frum on the podcast, on the Bulwark podcast this morning, is, I seem to be paying attention more and more and more to these ex-GOPers, okay? People like him, Steve Schmidt, the two fellows from the Lincoln Project. And, what I'm watching, and especially since about 2016, since the first election, or the time leading to the first election of Trump, all of these guys, if you were listening to them, everything they would say, anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to a year later, politics would unfold as they were telling us. And, it's kind of like, they were the big Cassandra calling, right? All of these ex-Republicans, because, they knew the psychology. They could see what was happening. Don't go listen to somebody like Varoufakis there, talk afterwards. Go listen to the source. You know what I mean? If you want to know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and they're also the members of the party who are so disaffected. So they know the workings of the party they're taking it seriously because it's their party unraveling. Whereas, not all Democrats did that for a very long time. They're only in the very recent past have Democrats really started to take that right-wing antic politics seriously. But they did right from the beginning. And so their predictions, of course, they had more gravity.
And a cast of characters, okay, like the fellows from the Lincoln Project. I can't remember their names at the moment; they escape me. But the fellow who wrote the book, "We Were Lied to,"
Not Stuart Stevens, no.
Stuart Stevens, exactly. Oh. Stevens was a protege of Lee Atwater. Okay,
it's just incredible.
It's incredible, and this guy now on the road to Damascus, okay, he struck off his horse and has seen the light. You put Stuart Stevens, okay, was a protege of Lee Atwater, is now sounding like probably one of the most left-wing Democrats you could possibly find. And he's not exactly there with AOC, but he is like, when it comes to democratic processes, this guy is like this is a monumental paradigm shift for that individual.
Yeah, and I mean, in many ways, we don't know what that entirely means. Does it mean that, always underlying his politics was a belief in the institutions and, the sort of possibility that he could move leftward? Or does it mean that the Democrats were always so close to the Republicans, establishment Republicans, that, there was virtually no serious difference?
Excellent. I mean, what a cynical bastard.
Anyway, so now everyone needs to know this is what we do. Sometimes we veer off and we're talking about something else.
But we always come back.
But we'll come back. We will always bring you back. And the reason we brought From up is because, From said pretty clearly, like, what's he going to do in his podcast? Well, he's not going to do the news. He's not going to do the day-to-day reporting of the news. And I think we're not going to do that either. That's why I bring it up, right? We're going to go theme to theme today. We're going to talk about anger in American politics. But we want to keep it roughly thematic. We're not going to be, I don't think, you've already seen, we're not going to be too constrained by that theme, obviously. But to the degree that we can keep it centered around one concept, I think, it's better for listeners. It's better for everyone.
We'll do our best. Like I said,
we'll do our best.
We might end up bringing in the most unbelievable metaphors, but we will always land back where we started.
Yeah.
We will close the circle.
That's it. Okay. So our theme for today, our topic for today, is it okay to be angry? And we had a kind of opening section that I worked on, talking about the Democrats in anger, talking about the Republican past in anger, not going into a whole bunch of detail. But I think we can start with, a general question, whether anger is useful in politics. Is it okay, just generally speaking? What's our general reaction to the question? Is it okay to be angry in the context of American politics now? I'm going to let Julian have a crack at it because I know he's dying to talk about
I want to
this.
apologize first for kind of like subverting your intro. But yeah, I mean, I've often been referred to as why are you always so negative? Why are you so angry? Why do you always post shit on Facebook? Why can't you post pictures of the cat? And I always find this interesting, right? Like I post stuff that I think, is like penetrating and maybe opening it drops like a lead balloon, right? But if I post one picture of me holding up a lake trout, like everybody, holy cow, 75 people start talking about how great everything is. And that drives me nuts because how can you have lived through the past 20 to 25 years, particularly in this North American milieu, American politics, Canadian politics and culture, and simply not be angry? I mean, how can you look at what happened with the artificial mortgage bubble of 2008, 2010, the selling of crap and calling it gold, watching an education system slowly decline in front of your eyes, and then in the current condition, have the Minister of Agriculture in the United States say, "Oh, eggs are too pricey. Go buy some chickens." My response would be, "Well, buy me a yard," right? How isn't anger the appropriate response? Like, what is the appropriate response? That would be my question. Ennui, alienation. And I think we have to ask ourselves, like, what is the appropriate response to this? Because, I find this to be really frustrating and a sort of a straitjacket on anybody who really wants to be critical. And I don't mean like criticize, I mean to be critical, right? You know what I mean? Because, people who always kind of are critical are accused of being misanthropic. And I think there's nothing wrong with being misanthropic. I think the problem is when you're cynical about the institutions and their willingness to address them to reform. Because, I'm not cynical when it comes to individuals and people in any way, particularly when they stand up on their hind legs and say, I'm not going to be lied to anymore, okay? When they say, I'm going to fight for what I perceive to be some shared truth, not a shared lie. But, you just can't be angry for the sake of being angry. I think that, the Clash has that wonderful line, what does it say? That anger can be power, hang on, I wrote it down. Let me see what it says. The song is called The Clampdown. And they have that beautiful line that says, let fury have the hour, anger can be power. Do you know that you can use it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd want to that's a really good accidental segue to what I want to say too. And on the one hand, I totally agree with you. I mean, what is the appropriate response? I don't even think it's just appropriate. I think it's also important to say it's understandable, right? That the anger, anger isn't just misanthropic, as you say, disdain of politics, right? That kind of. It's just that that's okay. It's that kind of, politicians are all liars, yada, yada, yada. That's not actually, I don't think, what's going on. I think what's going on in the current moment, as has gone on in the past, is it's an emergence of anger out of concrete circumstances. It is literally all those things you talked about in the last 25 years, but also in waves. It comes in waves, right? 2008, 2016, COVID, these moments in which the extreme inequality in U.S. politics in particular, and it's not, it's not isolated to the United States, but it's certainly, fresh there in a way it might not be in other places. But that gross inequality elicits anger naturally. And anger, and this is to your point, based on the Clash there, anger is more than just anger, right? Anger is conceptualized as political agency.
Yes.
The act of being angry is in fact a political action.
Yeah, and I think that collective awareness and outrage are reactions. Okay?
Yeah.
And I mean, the flip side of both coin. I mean, I will argue that they're not remedies, but they definitely are a reaction. One of the things that strikes me about this is, as we're having this conversation, I recalled Joe Bajan's essay after Bush was elected the second time. Do you remember the title of that essay? It was called Poor, White, and Pissed. Okay? And it was a fantastic essay, and it was essentially a precursor to his book that came out a couple of months later called Deer Hunting with Jesus, Dispatches from the American Class Wars or something like that. To me, this is one of the most important books ever written about politics in the last 25, 30 years. It was a journalistic account. The more academic account came from Thomas Frank, What's the Matter with Kansas? But this to me was much more powerful because it was coming from the heart of where this was happening, right? And, I think that this has been dismissed a lot. Okay, it's been dismissed as just a bunch of rednecks who don't even know how to be mad. And there's some truth to that, right? But I think that that's the problem. I think that a reason why we have a great deal of anger in American politics, particularly, and it's moved into Canada. Let's be honest here, right?
Yeah.
Is because a lot of the centrist, center left, and definitely the left have been tone deaf.
Yeah, and I think. Yeah, and I think their reaction to that anger has been a kind of mystified, almost not very genuine reaction to the effect of, where is this coming from? Where is this anger coming from? As if they have no conception whatsoever. Yeah. I mean, you remember the debates in 2010 when the Tea Party really started to take off and really energize itself. And there was all this kind of gut-wrenching debate going on around where this anger could possibly come from, as if it was this great mystery. But of course, in the wake of NAFTA, in the wake of, hollowing out of the Midwest, hollowing out of the industrial Northeast, this is not rocket science where this anger is coming from.
I agree. And it's too, like, it's not like, it was like an open secret or something. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it was being chronicled, not just in like the Times, the op-ed pages of the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. It was in the popular culture. Like, you could see it manifest itself in TV sitcoms like Roseanne, that wonderful working class hero that we have of her now, right? And you saw it like in movies such as Bulworth. There's that tremendous soliloquy when he's basically saying, you don't have to be a black person to be a slave, and he starts talking about, like, the low wage workers. I mean, it was there. People were writing about it. People were telling about it, but there seemed to be this kind of like almost dismissal. And I think that if we're going to get a little bit technical here and we're going to become a little bit like, wear our old academic hats, that seems to coincide with that kind of third way shift among Democratic politics. I think it goes back to Clinton, Barbara Ehrenreich wrote those fantastic books, right? Those first two books, so it's what Nickel and Dime.
Nickel and Dime, yeah.
And then the follow-up was Bait and Switch, about people who were in their 50s who were being basically...
in the professional class,
yeah. who were all of a sudden declared redundant, right? Yeah. And it's not like people were saying that, but it was something that people just kind of dismissed or kind of looked the other way or didn't want to talk about it. You know what I mean?
Well, and also there was this assumption, like, I think this was really big on the left, this assumption that people were getting angry and they didn't understand their own interests. So they were projecting their anger in a way that was counterintuitive to their own interests. And so, like, but that is a way of just looking down on people, right? It's not appreciating the anger for what it actually, the politics of that anger itself. Instead, it's just dismissing it as either irrationality or an inability to see the political field.
Well,
I just don't think that that's a good or productive reaction.
I mean, I want to add something to that. Okay, that's kind of important, and I know that we run the risk of sounding like these guys who are railing against political correctness and all of that language, but like, there's something to be said about that. If you take a look at the last elections, the last few elections, I would not say just the last one, but the last 4 or 5 presidential elections, and particularly you take a look at how Latino and black men voted, okay? And how their support for Trump actually kind of was higher than the other, right? And you always look at that connection too of the white industrial working class, these guys who are wearing hard hats. I got news for you. That's not the working class, okay? The working class is very multicultural, okay? But, it comes down to this. How are you going to tell a guy who was crouching underneath a rusty sink one half of the day in his 40s with bad knees, who had a 2-pack-a-day habit, his pickup truck was probably about 15 to 17 years old, his second job in the evening is cleaning office at night. He hasn't had a vacation in 25 years. He eats frozen dinners over the sink, the ones that he microwaves, because he can hardly break even at the end of the month. And he doesn't even have time to prepare a healthy meal. So he's probably about 25, 30 pounds overweight. How are you going to tell a guy like this that he's privileged? Okay? Do you think that he likes to be told that he's privileged? You know what I mean? I mean, eventually, these guys, that's played because it has a currency, right? Like, look at how people like Marjorie Taylor Greene have spun that into gold, okay?
Yeah.
Because it's easier to be angry than to sit there and say, well, what's happening to me, right? And, again, it's almost cliched, right? How you basically use that populism and pull that kind of anger out of people and then transfer it into some kind of political culture. I mean, and I just want to add something here, wrap this up. Yeah. It's very short-sighted. Take a look now at Poilievre. He's completely, he doesn't know what to say anymore. Because, once Trudeau was gone, which was the perfect, paper mache doll to hit over the head with this over and over again was gone, all he has is just that grievance. So that's what I go back
Right.
to that. Like, it's definitely a reaction, but it's not a remedy.
Yeah, that's right. But
Yeah.
it's a powerful reaction, and it's
Yeah.
one that the Republicans were very good at harnessing that. And I think that the Democrats wrote it off and spent 5 years laughing about it at their peril, their absolute peril.
Well, I mean,
And
like,
obviously the post 2016 speaks to that.
but I think you would agree too. There were sectors. There's always been that element of the Democratic Party internally. That
Mm-hmm.
Bernie Sanders or those congressmen that come from the Rust Belt states like Michigan, Ohio, who are always
Yeah, like
hardcore.
Sherrod Brown.
They were completely like, yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll call upon you when we need you to kind of trot out that the Democrats are still part of the working people. And I think that's it. Like, once these parties took that third way Blairite bullshit, and we saw it here in Canada. We saw it here. That there is no forget about class politics. We've moved beyond class politics. The
Yeah.
whole notion of like Jesus, Roddy. They were saying post-racial America after Obama got elected. Like, for crying out loud.
Yeah, well, I mean, if there's one service that's been, brought to politics by the two Trump administrations, is it's put it back on the radar in a very serious way, I think, and
Yeah,
like in a productive way. I think that people are taking it much more seriously now, and are in fact angry about it.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it swings both ways. Look at Black Lives Matter, right? Black Lives
Sure.
Matter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, tell me that was not a movement born out of just pure frustration and anger,
Sure.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. All right, so let's look specifically. Let's go from the general to the slightly more specific, and let's look at the way in which Democrats are expressing rage. In the current moment at Republican. Yeah, we'll get to that. We're going to get to that. So the question is,
let's go.
the question is, is this emotional anger? Is this being, effectively distilled for Democrats, or is it just resulting in a kind of immature politics? I said in the opening, typically, anger is kind of considered the domain of Republicans, and Democrats just aren't very good at being angry. So that's the question really: is the left very good at being angry, or can they be good at being angry?
I think there's something about this that like there's an absurdism to this, right? Because like it's been taken now to levels that I've never seen before, like absurd levels, on both sides in many ways. And I don't want to sound like it's on both sides, because there's definitely a superior, I would say, conception of it and translation of it from the left part of the Democratic Party. People like Ocasio-Cortez, the what do they call it? The Squad, right? With Rashida Tlaib is one of my favorites. I mean, this woman, like, she knows how to channel anger into the right institutional mechanisms and grievances. These people actually influence policy and say, look, you want to be angry about this? You can be angry about this, but here's the policy solution to this. There's a kind of realism there, right? And they're not asking for the world. This is the currency now.
Yeah. And I think that, it is the currency now. I think it won't have an enormous effect unless you get, an accelerating effect on the streets, right? Mass protests, which is happening. There's no doubt that it's happening. It's not being covered very well by the media, it has to be said. What did they estimate last weekend? Over 5 million people were on the streets. Yeah. You wouldn't know it by looking at the American media, left or right. Like it effectively didn't happen.
But okay, there's something here, okay? We have to say this. Like, let's be honest, okay? Like, qualitatively speaking, which one would you say there's a Republican form of anger is more impressionable, or the Democratic form of anger? Like, I'm sorry, but when you wear pink hats to a mass
No, I'm saying
raise paddles.
I agree. I think what has to I mean, on the one hand, you need mass anger. There's no doubt about it. You need mass anger at this point. To actually have a viable effect on politics, there's going to have to be, when I say protest, like, it goes beyond just street protests. It's also town halls, these sorts of things, right? Camping out at your district campaign office, all of these different things are ways in which you can put enormous points of popular pressure on the political system. But that has to be accompanied by a party that can distill and then channel that kind of rage in a powerful way. And you're right,
That's old school Gramsci, man.
TikTok dances and paddles during the State of the Union. It's just not going to do it. But if you are able to connect, that anger to concrete realities in people's lives through mass speech, through the media, through congressional speeches, if you're able to do that and you're able to do it effectively, I think it has an accelerant effect. And the political pressure it brings to bear is enormous. And I think, actually, I want to play a little clip here, because if you start bringing in all the different parts of people's lives, actual job losses, loss of social coverage, fear about, waning regulation, fear about health and public health, all of these different elements of people's actual concrete lives, I think you can have a remarkable political impact. And there are people in the Democratic Party who can do that. Chris Murphy can do that. AOC can do that. Sanders can do that. Jasmine Crockett can do that. They're quite good at
She's one of my favorites, actually.
I know.
I really like that she does it.
Any chance on Blue Sky I get to say Texas,
totally.
Texas, send more Jasmine Crockett.
Yeah, if I could add something to here, this is a problem. I think that I don't understand where it comes from, because Democrats used to get their noses bloodied. They used to be on picket lines. They used to be there. These are people who fought for the civil rights. Some of them lost their lives. You know what I mean? They were there. But I don't understand this, because for them, they see this politics as we'll rebrand ourselves, or we just have to think differently about the voters. Listen, if there's going to be another kind of shift, what it has to be the inverse of Trump. Okay, it has to be the movement towards not the middle, but towards winning a supermajority, 60%.
Yeah, I agree.
And and you know what? Just it has to be an FDR type coalition. And I emphasize the word coalition, right? The minute they start talking about changing the opinions of people, that's not how you win. You have to assail their material interests. Okay?
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that once or if they realize it, I think you will see the pendulum swing. The ground is fertile for this right now. I mean, take a look at what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just play this clip.
Please.
So, Sanders did this tour through the Midwest and Arizona, and in many ways, AOC, I think, stole the show. AOC spoke in a way I think that had a huge resonance. So I'll play this and we can talk about it on the other side.
Fox News and the right wing will have you believe that these American values are something out of the Communist Manifesto. That we believe these things because we went to college and read them in a book somewhere. But let me tell you, Fox News, I don't believe these things. I don't believe in healthcare, labor, and human dignity because I'm a Marxist. I believe it because I was a waitress. Because I scrubbed toilets with my mom to go to school. Because I've worked double shifts to keep the lights on. And because on my worst day, I know what it feels like to feel left behind. And I know that we don't have to live like this anymore, Las Vegas. We deserve better than this, Las Vegas. And despite the chaos that surrounds us at the moment, I want you to know that we are closer to that world than we think. This isn't just about Republicans. We need a Democratic Party that fights harder for us too. But what that means is that we, as a community, must choose and vote for Democrats and elected officials who know how to stand for the working class.
So, yeah.
Can I,
yeah.
I know I'm going to get wrapped on the knuckles for this, okay? By you. The next time we sit at the pub or something. But how can our lefty friends dismiss this person? Like call
Yeah.
her like a weak-kneed social democrat. Like to
No,
me, like
I don't know.
this is like I would be a member of the Democratic Party in Las Vegas if I lived there and I saw that. Okay.
We are gonna have to table that item.
Yeah. And
We're gonna have to table that item.
We-
But on the other hand, there are many still in the Democratic Party who make these glib references to AOC as well. You know, we don't want to take an approach that's radical like AOC. But this is, I mean, that's exactly her point. This is not particularly radical.
Nothing about it is radical. Like the political spectrum has moved so much to like shifted so much to the right that this is like as they refer to this as being as lunatic as the Tea Party.
Yeah.
Or the equivalent. Sorry.
But the effect here is extraordinary, I think. Like, I mean, what's she really doing, right? Like she's stirring up anger. Like the speech is about stirring up a hornet's nest.
Outrage.
But it's taking it to where people are. It's taking it into red districts. It's taking it into Fox News. It's making people hear that message, right? That's grounded in those concrete issues.
And it's an acknowledgement that the working class has changed.
Sure.
Okay, it's not the guys who wear hard hats. You know, this idea that, I mean, this is the thing I hate, the white working class. Like, come on, man. Last time I checked, I mean, particularly in this country, if you go take a look around at who's doing all the jobs, okay, they're not white people, okay? You know, especially in the city I live in. This godforsaken third city called Ottawa, okay? Like, you know,
you had to get that in. You had to get that in.
Totally, man. I know it that was a little bit forced, but, you know.
Hey, that's all right. That's
it's okay.
All right.
But, like, I mean, like, I walk around my neighborhood. You know, I live downtown, right? And it's like the servant class. And they're not men either, right? It's overwhelmingly women. Oh.
Yeah, and I think you need to speak about that, you know, precisely those realities in people's lives. And that's what AOC is doing incredibly effectively.
Unreal.
I wouldn't be surprised to see a Senate run there in the very near future.
Well, there's been a lot of chatter that apparently, and I think that this is way too premature, that they're going to make a run for the Democratic leadership with her. But there seems to be a lot of talent in the Democratic Party that has been basically subverted for a long time by this gerontocracy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of young, and like an overwhelmingly representative talent. You know, everybody from Cory Booker down to Jasmine Crockett, down to you know, like Gretchen Whitmer.
You did mention Cory Booker, so there's a contrast. I have another clip. There's another clip, and you know, we can see, like, is this the same kind of appeal to anger and appeal to emotion as AOC?
I want to stand here today and tell you I'm going to do everything I can. I'm willing to go to some lengths. But I am inadequate. You are inadequate. We're senators with all of this power, but in this democracy, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. This is a moral moment that more Americans need to stand up and say enough is enough.
Right. Okay. So we've got...
What's your take on this?
So it's a mixed bag for me. It's a mixed bag. I've never been a huge Cory Booker fan.
Neither have I.
I mean, if anyone can be fans of politicians, but on the one hand, it raised huge awareness. It got the national eye, and I think it embarrassed some other Democrats. It embarrassed maybe some Republicans. So, you know, that element of it, okay. But you know, the weepy-eyed, the doughy-eyed approach of Cory Booker that seems very much to be about Cory Booker, I'm not really that enthralled with. It really very much often seems this anodyne, very general message about choices that Americans have to make. And I play that after the AOC clip precisely because I think it's really contrastable. It's this very abstract, vague, emotional appeal compared to AOC's appeal, which is really about your life. It's something that people grab onto and they immediately identify with. I don't think, you know, people, you know, they like the stunt that Cory Booker pulls off, but I don't think they actually relate to a lot of the things he's talking about.
I agree with you, Roddy. I mean, to be honest, my initial reaction to this is, how do I say that? I just thought it was performative. Okay, and I just said, well, big deal. I mean, David Simon said something that was absolutely brilliant on his Blue Sky the other day. He said something to the effect of, he goes, great. Now, if we can only do this for the next 3.5 years, maybe we've got something here. You know what I mean? That because how effective can it be? And then I was listening to John Heilman's podcast last Tuesday. I can't remember, Ben Winkler, I think his name was. He was an old-time journalist, and he came out with it like an editorial the next day saying, yeah, big deal. So he held his pee for 24 hours, right? And he got castigated for it, really, by almost every Democrat or everybody from the left wing saying, this is important. This is important. Now, that sends two things that strikes me as two things. On the one hand, is that how pathetic the Democratic Party has become? Is that they've got to hope for this kind of cheerleading to inspire them, right? And if that's the case and it's effective, well then, hey, I'm all for it if it's effective. I mean, but I really have to question. The way news cycles are constructed now, it's already forgotten. You know what I mean? It was big news
I
for
agree.
24 hours.
I agree.
Everybody was going, oh, wow, great for him. And it's not even 7 days and everybody's, oh, yeah, Cory Booker. Oh, yeah, remember when that happened?
Yeah, and it also has, we've been talking about anger, and I actually don't think he harnessed anger very effectively. I think that it was a very dewy-eyed expression, a nostalgic expression.
Obama
for
too,
something that exists in the past. Yeah, Obama too, in many ways, right? And I think it also feeds into the critique that's there about Democrats, and it's an auto-generated, it's a self-critique, but it's a valid one. We have to stop defending the status quo. We have to stop defending institutions as they are. And I think, he may have wrapped that up in a lot of emotional candor, but at the same time, at the end of the day, he's just defending the institutions as they exist for the most part.
I'm going to say something that's heretical among our lefty colleagues. I've been listening to Rahm Emanuel speak about this kind of notion. And
You're going to get yourself in trouble here, Julie.
Big time, man. I got to be honest with you. I don't like the guy at all. He is one. But one thing I do admire is he is not afraid of a bare knuckle fight. Okay.
No, that's right.
And as a matter of fact, he'll cheat too if you have to. And one of the things that he said, you know what? Stop defending the status quo, right? Yeah. Stop putting yourself in that position where, because it's a trap, right? It's essentially a trap set by the Trump MAGA Republicans, which is brilliant, right? They'll talk about immigration, and there are problems with immigration. There are serious problems with immigration, right? And migration. But in the minute, these guys, they say, well, we're going to lock everybody up and we're going to send ICE into the homes and stormtroopers are going to deport 12 million. And they say, what they put themselves in is in this position of defending the status quo. They said, well, we're against that. And then, the way they triangulate the issues, they'll say, well, then you're for connecting. Are you for the current kind of immigration and migration policies?
Yeah,
we
exactly.
have?
Yeah, they box themselves in.
What saying it, and then if you listen to him very carefully, he'll say, "Yeah, let's have that debate, and let's tell you what our alternatives is." Now, I'm probably not going to like what Rahm Emanuel's alternative is at all, but that brings up a space for real progressive policy and dialogue. And there are a lot of people who have brought up, Ezra Klein has been very good on this.
Yeah, that's right. And it also puts the lie. It puts the lie to the right wing. It puts the lie to that performative argument that lefties are all evasive. They all don't want to solve the problems of the American policy space. They want to live off the fat of the state, so on and so forth.
Well, this goes back to this discussion about anger. Okay, and in many ways, because again, the superior anger is the Republican anger, because if indeed the center or the center left kind of argument would actually argue on real policy initiatives and stand by those things rather than worry about alienating this demographic and alienating that demographic, they'll say, look, let's have this debate. And here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to change it. And we're going to be humane about this. And yes, we're going to treat the problem at the border.
But before I'm going to move on to the next question, and that is, we talked about it a little bit before we came on the air, but the idea of internecine anger, right? Anger, Democrat on Democrat anger. The question is, is it justified, right? Because it's not just, you and I, two schmucks sitting around talking about lefties, but I mean, this has real consequences. Is it justified for Democrats in the current moment to be, attacking other Democrats?
Well, this is going to open up a discussion that maybe we should have another podcast, because it's to me let's go directly to the heart of the matter, right? It's about power and winning. Okay, and look at the difference between. Now we're seeing cracks in the MAGA movement, and
I want to get to that.
Essentially, let's be honest, it's an episode of The Apprentice. Okay, let's go get the Gary
we'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, for sure.
Let's get the Gary Buseys of this world and the Omarosas, and let them fight it out, and whoever, that's what he's doing. But so we're seeing the cracks there. But if you look at Republicans, they would rather eat poison and die of convulsions in front of you than to turn on the message. Okay. Yeah. Whereas in the Democrats, dare I say it, I'm going to go all the way. It's the narcissism of small differences. You know what I mean? And there was never that kind of cohesiveness, like party discipline. Now, there are arguments that are very, very, very well justified against the notion of party discipline, right? But when you have an aim to stop an anti-democratic movement, you got to put that internecine fighting behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's okay. But what about, that's one aspect of the anger, right? You don't want just small differences to break the call it solidarity. We're not supposed to use this. I forget which podcast. I forget which podcast I was listening to where they basically just said, stop using the word solidarity. Stop.
They should, because solidarity is the left version of thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, maybe. But okay, so we'll say unity, right? So there's that notion that you don't want to pursue your differences to the degree that you break unity. But what about effectiveness and a lack of effectiveness? What about the anger directed at Chuck Schumer, for instance? This is effectively the party leader now. And, he faced just a tsunami of anger over his bait and switch in the Senate.
But my response
over the budget resolution.
My response to that is that is like a weak party system. Okay. Yeah. When a guy turns on everybody like that, to me, that is in many ways at the crux of the problem here. Okay. This, I don't know how many times I've said this, but this populism, okay, that, this idea that, this Trump phenomenon, Trumpism, it's like some right-wing conservative avant-garde populist ideology. It's a pure reactionary logic. And it's been able to flourish because of the vacuum and the missteps and mishaps set by the so-called Democratic left or the Democratic Party of the centrists. You could draw a straight line to the spectacular failure of the left to the emergence of Donald Trump. Okay, and Chuck Schumer should not be running to be the leader of the Democratic Party. Okay?
Yeah, it's very interesting though, because I feel like he did precisely what you just outlined, that he put himself back in this channel of civility that exists within the party, for sure, in that moment. But he got himself in a bind, interestingly, because he got caught up in the wave of anger, didn't he? Right? In the days prior, he's sitting on the Senate floor going, we will not. There's no way. Right? And
he's almost within the same sentence, he flipped it.
He flipped it, right? And it's almost as if he's got two personalities.
Well,
and
Like, hey,
Or, well, maybe not. Maybe that
Nancy
tapping into the
Pelosi is
anger
just-
is not especially genuine, right? I mean,
Nancy-
the TikTok dances aren't either.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and the rest of that freaking generation are guilty of this, okay? And I think that this idea, because there's not a healthy democratic culture within the Democratic Party, right? It's basically promotion due to seniority, okay? And it's this person's turn. Like, I mean, this is a pet peeve of mine. I don't know, man. This goes back to our intro. What is the appropriate response? But maybe there's an addendum to that question is, do you know how to be angry?
Yeah.
Like,
Do you know how to be angry and politically strategic?
Yeah.
At the same time.
like just being like a crank is full of shit, okay?
Yeah.
But like having that grounded in reality and real solutions. If anybody's worked at a job in an office, right? If you come to the table with a problem, you have the solution,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
And
it's
solutions aren't easy, but I mean, one of the things, and let's move to another question, because you already mentioned it, that there's another side to the political anger, and that's the anger internal to the Republican Party that we haven't really seen completely spill out yet. But I think it's inevitable. It's absolutely inevitable.
totally, man.
I mean, the anger, we've sort of hinted at all along, but I think that's a reality. The Republicans have been very good in opposition harnessing anger, right from 2008 forward. They put it right at the forefront. They used it at a ground level. I mean, we could say that was grassroots. We could say it was AstroTurf movements. We could say anything. It doesn't really matter. It was expressed in the public space. And most importantly, the political figures at the top of the power echelon in the Republican Party very quickly recognized that this was a lifeline for the Republican Party in the wake of Obama mania. And they harnessed that. I mean, the Mitch McConnells, the Kevin McCarthy, Liz Cheney was in there, John Boehner. These people harnessed this anger. Now, they got out of control out of them, on them, and it eventually more or less ended their political career, with the exception of Mitch McConnell. But, very quickly they harnessed that in opposition. But in government, it's a different question.
It's disingenuous, right? Like when you get those characters like Comer Pyle there from Alabama and Arnold Zeffel the pig there from Louisiana, those guys. Like these guys with their big draw accents, like talk about performative bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's disingenuous, right? Because I think that there needs to be an addendum here to this. And the addendum is that nobody hates the rural working poor more than conservatives and Christian and evangelical Christians, okay? Almost unanimously, these so-called representatives of the rural working poor, they don't even visit their communities unless they have to. They hate the idea of it. Look at the lengths many of their representatives go not to even live in those districts, right? There's a big chunk of them that just don't care. And let's be clear about what's happening here. Bear with me here, okay? Because I have a real hard time empathizing with these people who complain about paying $6 for a carton of eggs when they satiate themselves with ridiculous automobiles and vehicles that take like almost, $130, $140 to fill up a tank of gas. They spend ridiculous money on online gambling sites and local marijuana dispensaries and liquor stores. This notion that I have to empathize with people who are living in $500,000 houses and spend like drunken sailors on the aforementioned vices. I mean, this is like this consumer plantation they shop at every week, and they're pissed off because they have to pay $2 on a carton of eggs for a year, after which we had like a pandemic-style inflation spiral. Modest at best was the pandemic, and the indications show that inflation was cooling until this moron took over. Okay?
Yeah.
So I have like a hard time believing that anger within the Republican Party.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's. Well, I mean, we need to do. I think this needs to be our next show, right? The movements of the Republican Party. Why do Republicans go along with so-called Trumpism, if there is such a thing? But it doesn't have to reflect a concrete reality, does it? It doesn't actually
Well,
have to.
I agree with
right?
you.
And that's what the Republicans have done so well. They put it in the public space in a way that even if you don't, intuitively feel that anger, you believe that it's there. And you believe it's worth tapping into.
The flip side of the coin is not only have the Republicans done it well, but the Democrats have done it so poorly.
Yeah.
Like, they're hapless at this. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the question then. Like,
let me put this dichotomy.
Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, it was just reported that when she entered the American House of Representatives, her value was $700,000. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know what it is now?
Oh, I'm sure.
22 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And yet, she's fighting for the rural Georgian peasants there. Okay.
Yeah.
But she's more credible.
Never put her name to a piece of legislation.
Yeah. Nothing. And she is more credible than Chuck Schumer, who has been in the Senate for 125 years. Okay. Professes to be the savior of the working class. This guy is this is it, right? Like,
well, it also seems that her seat is going to be more secure as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks to gerrymandering, right? I mean, but like,
sure,
but that's the image, right? Like, they just don't know how to play that game.
No, I think that's right, but that's the question then. So, if it's one thing to do this in opposition, of course. It's another thing to do it once you have power over the three branches of government. And then you've got to put up or shut up. And the difficulty, of course, is that you have to draw lines in the sand, policy lines in the sand. And Republicans, once they actually have to react to a real policy, they're not reacting to something that Democrats are doing. They have to either sign on or not sign on. That's where the contention is going to lie. And that's where these figures are going to start to come at each other. We're already seeing that around various things, the tariff policy, not the least of them. So here's the thing. Should Democrats react to that in a way, that James Carville suggests, where, you more or less let the Republicans have at it? Or should Democrats be on that at every step? Should they be attacking Republicans on every little thing, every little contradiction, every little blow up?
My initial knee-jerk reaction is yes. Like, if you're in politics, you're in for a nickel, you're in for a dollar. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this should be your life and you should be fighting. But that's not feasible. But there are certain things you just can't let pass. And I think that's the problem here. Okay. Like, the Democrats are just clueless when it comes to this, right? They don't know how to prioritize issues.
Yeah.
And one of the things that conservatives have been just amazing at is to paint themselves as victimized and, like their modus operandi has always been one after another about how they've been victimized, how, just sophistry and casuistry that they're using, like they gaslight people, and like the lies are incredible. Yeah. And, and this is where it gets to your point. None of this would pass if the response was, tell us about your policies then. Yeah. How do you plan to remedy, which is what you just said. How do you plan to remedy this? And you know what? Democrats and social movement leftists fall into that trap all the time. They engage in this moral argument with them. Okay? Yeah. You're not going to win when you do that. Like, it's like, listen, once conservatives and Republicans latch on to those cultural questions and they turn those cultural questions into political questions, they're gonna lose all the time. Okay, because it's not about it's not about winning or losing. It's about establishing a narrative.
Yeah, right? That's right. And I think that you're right, that Democrats very quickly default to these moralistic arguments about what is right and what is wrong, what is tradition and what is not tradition, what is convention and what is not convention. And I just don't think Republicans are saddled by that in any particular way. They're willing to change direction. They're willing to lie. they're willing to, and in the current environment, they're willing to project their own set of, concrete realities. And as you say, construct a narrative around those realities, whether they have anything to do with the current circumstance or not.
No, it's something like, what I mean? Like I said, they're products of a culture that the outrages just mount day after day. Okay.
Yeah.
On issues of great and small. And it's like this torrent of rage and indignation and victimization. And I mean, like what always confounds me and like drives me crazy. Like I lose sleep over this. I almost get into fights almost every day about this. Like, when I try to say it's particularly telling of a culture that is controlled, like I'm talking about GOPs and conservatives and Conservative Party here in Canada. Like it's particularly telling of a culture that has controlled the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of governments, the majority of governorships in the United States, the majority of premierships here in Canada, definitely controlled the media, that they somehow managed to paint themselves as being persecuted and helpless and oppressed every time, and they establish this as fact, okay? And for me, in virtually any conceivable setting, this kind of self-victimization would be utterly discredited if the battles were fought on specific winnable issues of policy, okay? Because what they do by not responding to that anger in an appropriate way, like the Chuck Schumer style, right? What they do is they basically allow conservatives and their parties and so on and so forth to adopt these policy agendas, which they cannot possibly achieve their goals, right? So they look like they're fighting the good fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This partisan cause, right? But and who wouldn't want to be on the side of the vanguard of freedom and righteousness, right? What it is, I think, in many ways, is you can call it complacency, but I'm going to call it pure laziness. It's intellectual laziness.
Is it also though that
political laziness?
But is it also that Republicans have a natural advantage here in American political culture?
I refuse to accept that, man.
Well, here's why I say that. I mean, if you think that, American political culture is highly individualized, highly compartmentalized lives, in American society, it's hard from a democratic point of view, where you're constantly talking in policy terms around social issues, right? About issues that connect us as individuals and as a society. It's hard to tap into any kind of anger about, sociality, because sociality is not deeply in the fabric of of United States society.
Yeah, okay. Listen, what you're saying.
I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying it's hard.
Listen, I buy this hook, line, and sinker. As a matter of fact, I was writing something about this morning, and I think you're absolutely right about this. But I think there has to be piggybacked on another fact, and it's just political science 101, okay?
Yeah.
Republicans, again, I'm going to go back to this argument that Democrats, and I don't mean Democrats, the Democratic Party, people who believe in democracy, centrists, leftists, and center-lefts, okay, whatever, social movement people, whatever. They're lazy, okay? And they're also intellectually lazy. And I'll tell you why. Look how many people vote, okay?
Yeah.
In the United States, it's 40% of those who register. Not even 100%, okay?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then in Canada, we used to be the envy of the democratic Western world. We used to have turnouts in the high 80s, okay? Yeah. Now we barely break 50. And what's important,
depending on the election,
is that the political parties of the right have been masterful at organizing and mobilizing their vote, right? Whereas the centers and the left and the Democrats believe that the moral arguments and the moral suasion will win at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to get too far into an electoral argument, but I think you're right. There's also a demographic destiny that the Democrats have aligned themselves to that I think has not worked out well, and they never should have. They never should have believed that it was naturally the case that a growing Hispanic population would naturally vote Democrat. Why?
Like,
Why?
look, man. You
Hispanics are predominantly Catholic. Many of them are very
Exactly.
conservative. Like,
I mean,
why?
look no further than the last provincial election in Ontario. When you break down the numbers, Doug Ford won a crushing majority
Yeah.
with 18%.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. I
Okay.
mean, they know what to mobilize.
Yeah.
Okay, but here I'll say, you know, I already covered the idea that, you know, we're not supposed to say solidarity or collective action anymore, which, I mean, I do have some problem with, actually, because it, you know, from a comparative standpoint, there are lots of other cultures where it's clear you can say that, and in fact, it has real resonance on a political basis. And in fact, you can't even talk about politics without talking about collective action. I mean, it underlies what politics is, doesn't it? But you can't really speak about it easily in the American political culture. But one thing you can do, and here I want to play another AOC clip.
Okay.
One thing you can do is talk about community.
Yeah. No, I agree with
right?
you.
And I think that community is the gateway for Democrats to start talking about these issues in more pronounced ways and to start stirring up the anger that's necessary, right, to bring electoral mobilization that you're talking about.
Go ahead, because I have a point I want to make about
I'll play it, and because I think she does this in quite a clever way.
For it. You see, these budgets aren't just fights about numbers. They are fights over our values that define us as a country. Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security were promises that we as a people have made to each other about what kind of country we are and who we are. It's not handed down from a politician or a billionaire. This is about the promises we make to each other. From neighbor to neighbor, from father to daughter, from friend to friend. You see, these budgets, again, they aren't fights about numbers. And these promises don't come from politicians. They come from us. And they are promises that we make to each other. So to me, the strength of our country is not just measured by the height of our best days. It's also about who's there for us on our worst day.
Bingo. Dude, I want to ask something here. And I'm going to get wrapped. This is the second time, maybe wait a minute. By my count, it actually might be the fifth time that I might get my knuckles wrapped by you next time we sit at the pub. Okay. But this is what drives me crazy about our lefty friends or our old colleagues, right? Is this kind of dismissal of American theory and history. Alexis de Tocqueville, 200 years ago, right? In Democracy in America. What's the one thing that strikes this guy? Is the level
voluntary
of
organizations
across the United States.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Say whatever the hell you want about how, that bullshit American exceptionalism, the paranoid style of American politics, the John Birch Society, all those wackos and all of the slavery shit that's come out of the United States. One of the things that the United States is, they do believe in these populist movements. Yeah, they're not Jose Marti or Simon Bolivar or, for God forbid, even Fidel Castro, right? Yeah. But they have this tradition that is deep in them and organized at the community level. And
I agree.
If you've ever traveled across the United States and spent some real time looking around, like the way you and I have, you will see this in their everyday practices.
No, I absolutely agree, having spent a good deal of time in the United States very recently, and I saw it regularly. You know, people talk about the United States having very low electoral turnout, that Americans aren't politically mobilized, and I simply don't think that that mobilization finds itself primarily at the ballot box. It finds itself through social organizations. That's where Americans are especially active, enormously active. And the organizations are just infinite. The number of organizations working on very small, incredibly small causes.
Associations to PTAs, to parent teachers associations. I mean, one of the things that always blows me out of the water, and I mean, again, political science 101, like, we may not be fond of these movements. Try to build a highway through one of these residential areas, or drop in a halfway house, or a battered women's shelter in one of these neighborhoods. Look how quickly those communities organize. Okay?
Yeah, and that's political. And that's political agency, and it's political capacity.
that goes back to, like, again, the fury have the hour, anger can be power, you know that you can use it, right? Those people know how to tap into that kind of notion that you are, quote unquote, treading on me.
And that's what I think AOC is doing here. And that's why I think it's so interesting, right? Because she is taking the subject matter that Republicans regularly take aim at, right? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, big government programs. These are the, this is the red meat for the Republican attack, government controlling your life. But look how she systematically removes government from the picture.
And she appeals to the same issues that we just talked about like 2 minutes ago.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's really extraordinary. And I think that is the path forward. If you're going to harness anger within the Democratic Party and within, a wider electorate, that has to be the path you go forward with. And you have to suggest that Republicans are getting in the way of these community relationships.
You know what, Roddy? That's a great place to handle. I'm going to break the fourth wall here, because we're already in the territory of, like, Ezra Klein.
I know, and we're not on that level yet, are we?
No, and we don't have that kind of base.
We got to be modest. Let's be humble.
That's a great place to wrap this up. You know what I mean?
Okay, all right. So next week, I think we're probably going to do Republican politics.
Well, listen, man. Listen. Take the time to listen to us, follow us. Trust me, you may not like us the first time, but we're like a bad cold, you'll get used to us, okay?
Yeah, that's right. That's it. Okay. All right.
Take care. I had a blast.